The Great Hall of Zenith Prime Station stretched 300 meters from end to end. Ambassador Chen Zhao stood at the speaker's platform and looked at the assembled representatives. 847 species sat in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen like humans. Others lived in tanks of liquid methane or floated in containment fields. The diversity was beautiful, Chen thought. This was supposed to be where the galaxy came together to solve problems. Today the problem was extinction. Ambassador Sekthen of the Velm stood before them all. His silver skin had turned dull gray with stress. His three eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep distress among his people. Chen had learned this during his years working with alien species. The Velm were peaceful farmers and artists. They had never fought a war. They had never needed to. Now they were dying. The hologram above Sekthen showed worlds burning. The Kresh swarm had already consumed 2 Velm colony worlds. The images were terrible. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were now covered in a black writhing mass. The Kresh were like insects, but they were also like machines. They ate everything. Stone, metal, flesh. They learned from every world they destroyed. They adapted to every weapon used against them. Sekthen's voice shook as he spoke through the translator. His words came out in calm, measured tones, but Chen could see the desperation in his movements. The Velm had 6 months, maybe less. Their last world, Velm Prime, held 4.7 million souls. The Kresh would reach them soon. The Velm military, what little they had, could not stop the swarm. Chen rose to speak when Sekthen finished. He had prepared his speech carefully. Earth had 3 battle fleets ready. Humanity had soldiers who trained for exactly this kind of fight. They had weapons that could burn worlds clean if needed. Chen told the assembly that humans would help. They would send their ships. They would send their troops. The Velm would not die alone. Then the debates began. The Tholian representative, a being that looked like living crystal, spoke for an hour about the dangers of intervention. What if the Kresh were a natural part of galactic evolution? What if removing them would damage the cosmic balance? The Tholians had existed for 50,000 years. They spoke with the weight of ages. The Kavarn delegate argued about economic impact. Sending a military fleet cost resources. Who would pay for it? Would the Velm compensate the assembly? The Kavarn were traders first and foremost. Every decision came down to profit and loss. Other species raised concerns about cultural sensitivity. What if military action offended species who valued peace? What about the psychological impact on peaceful civilizations seeing such violence? Should they not consider the emotional well-being of all assembly members? Chen tried to interrupt. He banged his hand on the speaker's platform. The sound echoed through the hall, but no one paid attention. The debate rolled on like a slow river. It followed rules that had been established thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. A committee was proposed. It would study the Kresh threat and make recommendations. The committee would need 3 months to form, another 2 months to investigate, then 3 months to write their report. The vote passed overwhelmingly. 8 months total. The Velm had 6 months before extinction. Chen stood again. He spoke without being recognized. His voice cut through the murmuring. He said that 8 months meant death. He said the Velm needed help now, not a report later. He said humanity would act with or without assembly approval. The hall erupted. The presiding officer, a being called a Zintar that communicated through color changes, flashed angry reds and oranges. Chen was violating protocol. He was speaking out of turn. He was showing the aggression that young species were known for. Humans had only been in space for a few centuries. They did not understand the delicate balance required to govern nearly 1,000 worlds. The Zintar cut off Chen's microphone. The ambassador found himself speaking to a hall that could not hear him. He watched his words disappear into silence. Around him, the assembly returned to their debate about proper committee structures. Sekthen sat in the Velm section. His 3 eyes had dimmed. He understood what the vote meant. His people would die while the assembly talked. Chen met his gaze across the hall. He gave a small nod. Sekthen nodded back, though he looked like he had lost all hope. That evening, Chen sent a message back to Earth. It was short. He told them the assembly had failed. He told them the Velm would receive no help. He recommended Earth withdraw from the debate entirely. The next day, Earth's government issued a statement. It contained only one sentence. Humanity withdraws from assembly debates on this matter. No explanation. No argument. Just withdrawal. The other species saw this as defeat. The young humans had learned their place. They had tried to push for action and been rejected. Now they were sulking, returning home with their pride wounded. This was how young species always behaved. They would learn patience in a few centuries. Chen packed his belongings that night. He had spent 5 years on Zenith Prime. He had believed in the assembly. He had thought it was humanity's chance to be part of something greater. Now he knew better. The assembly was a place for talking, not doing. It was a place where species came to feel wise while others died. As his ship left the station, Chen looked back at the Great Hall through the viewport. Somewhere in there, 847 species were still talking. They would talk for months. By then, the Velm would be gone, unless someone chose action over words. The meeting room in Geneva was quiet. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo sat at the head of the table. Around her were the leaders of Earth's unified government. Prime Minister Torres, Chancellor Schmidt, President Okoro, General Kimathi of the Space Force. They had all read Ambassador Chen's report. The room had no windows. No one outside this building would know what happened here today. That was intentional. Admiral Okonkwo spoke first. She had commanded Earth's fleets for 12 years. She had fought pirates in the outer colonies. She had defended mining stations from raiders. She knew what humanity's military could do. More importantly, she knew what it should do. The plan was simple. Earth would save the Velm. They would do it quietly. No announcements. No press releases. No diplomatic notifications to the assembly. The galaxy would learn about it when it was done. President Okoro asked about the risks. If they acted without assembly approval, other species might see it as aggression. The Kavarn Empire had the second largest fleet in known space. They might view human military action as a threat. They might mobilize their own forces. Admiral Okonkwo nodded. She understood the risk. But she also understood the alternative. 4.7 million Velm would die. The galaxy would watch them die. And humanity would have done nothing. That was not acceptable. The vote was unanimous. Earth would act. The mobilization began that night. Admiral Okonkwo sent coded messages to fleet commanders across human space. Every message was the same. Prepare for immediate deployment. Communications blackout in effect. No external transmissions without direct authorization. Ships began moving toward designated rally points. The carriers Ark Royal and Shanghai left Mars orbit. The battleships Mandela and Churchill departed from Europa Station. Destroyers pulled away from patrol routes along the outer rim. Hospital ships left their docks. Supply vessels loaded with food and medicine joined the growing fleet. The fleet grew larger every day. 340 ships in total. It was the largest human military force ever assembled outside the solar system. To gather these ships, Earth stripped defenses from its own colonies. Mars lost half its patrol fleet. The asteroid belt colonies had to rely on local defense forces. Even Earth itself reduced its orbital guard. The risks were enormous. If an enemy attacked while the fleet was gone, humanity's colonies would be vulnerable. But the decision had been made. The Velm needed help now. Earth's security would have to wait. The civilian volunteers came in waves. Doctors saw the news reports about the Velm and knew what was coming. They knew humanity was planning something. They showed up at recruitment centers without being asked. Engineers did the same. Logistics specialists, trauma surgeons, xenobiologists who understood alien physiology. A woman named Dr. Sarah Chen was one of them. She worked at a hospital in Singapore. She had spent 10 years studying Velm biology after meeting Velm traders at a medical conference. When the recruitment office opened that morning, she was the first person in line. She asked only one question. When do we leave? The fleet gathered at Titan Station. It was the farthest major human installation from Earth, deep in the outer system. Ships arrived in small groups to avoid detection. They maintained communication silence. Their transponders were shut down. To the rest of the galaxy, these ships had simply disappeared. Other species noticed. Intelligence services across the galaxy reported the unusual activity. Human ships were moving, but no one knew why. Earth's government refused to answer questions. They did not deny the movements. They did not explain them. They simply stayed silent. The Galactic Assembly sent 3 formal inquiries to Earth's diplomatic office. Each inquiry asked about the fleet movements. Each inquiry was met with the same response. No comment at this time. Some species began to worry. The Kavarn Empire moved 2 of their own fleets to their borders with human space. They did not know what the humans were planning, but they would be ready. The Kavarn had not survived for 3,000 years by being careless. The Tholians, those ancient beings of living crystal, watched with interest. They had seen young species make bold moves before. Usually those moves ended in disaster. The Tholians calculated the probability of human success at 12%. They expected to be studying the wreckage of the human fleet within 6 months. On Zenith Prime, Ambassador Chen received orders to return to Earth immediately. He boarded his transport ship without ceremony. As he left, other diplomats asked him what was happening. Why was Earth mobilizing? Where were the ships going? Chen smiled but said nothing. He had learned the value of silence. When Chen arrived at Titan Station 3 weeks later, he stood on the observation deck and stared at the assembled fleet. 340 ships filled the space around the moon, carriers as large as cities, battleships bristling with weapons, small fast destroyers built for close combat, medical ships painted white with red crosses, supply vessels heavy with food and equipment. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Admiral Okonkwo found him there. She stood beside him and looked at the fleet she had built. She said nothing for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost sad. "We're ready," she said. "Tomorrow we jump to Velm space." Chen asked if she was afraid. Okonkwo nodded. She was terrified. This was not a pirate raid or a border skirmish. This was real war against an enemy that had destroyed entire worlds. Many of the men and women on these ships would not come home, but the alternative was worse. That night, the fleet prepared for departure. Crews ran final checks on their ships. Marines loaded weapons and armor. Doctors stocked medical bays with supplies. Engineers tested the jump drives one last time. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of her flagship, the carrier Indomitable. She looked at the faces of her bridge crew. They were young, most of them. They had trained for war but never seen it. Tomorrow they would, she gave the order. All ships prepare to jump. Destination Velm Prime. Communications blackout remains in effect. We go in silence. The fleet jumped as one. 340 ships vanished from Titan orbit in a flash of blue light. They left no message. They sent no warning. The galaxy would learn what humanity had done when it was finished. On Zenith Prime, the Galactic Assembly was still meeting. They were discussing the formation of their committee to study the Kresh threat. The debate had been going on for hours. They would debate for hours more. They did not know that humanity had stopped talking and started acting. The human fleet emerged from jump space and immediately understood they were too late. 2 Velm worlds were gone. The planets still existed, but they were dead. Where cities had stood, there was only black biomass. The Kresh had consumed everything. Buildings, forests, oceans, even the atmosphere. What remained looked like a cancer growing across the surface of 2 worlds. Velm Prime was still fighting. Admiral Okonkwo could see the battle from her command deck. The Kresh swarm had landed on the southern continent. Black tendrils spread across farmland and cities. Small Velm defense ships fired missiles at the growing mass, but it did nothing. The Kresh absorbed the explosions and kept spreading. Billions of Velm were already dead on the other 2 worlds. Okonkwo had seen the intelligence reports. She knew what the Kresh did to living beings. It was not a clean death. It was not quick. She pushed those thoughts aside. There was still time to save the ones on Velm Prime. She did not waste time on speeches or declarations. She opened a direct channel to all ships. Begin evacuation operations. Combat units establish perimeter. Medical ships prepare for incoming wounded. All vessels, you are weapons free. Destroy anything that moves toward evacuation zones. The fleet moved as one coordinated force. Human Marines launched from their carriers and drop pods. They hit the surface like meteors, establishing defensive lines around population centers. Engineers set up portable shields in landing zones. Medical teams prepared field hospitals. The Velm had not expected help. When human ships appeared in their sky, many thought they were hallucinating. Ambassador Sekthan was in the capital city when the first Marines landed. He watched armored humans march past his government building and set up weapons facing the Kresh advance. One Marine, a woman with sergeant stripes, saw him standing there. She gave him a short nod and returned to her work. No explanations. No formal greetings. Just action. The transport ships began landing. They were not elegant. They were big, ugly cargo haulers designed to carry maximum capacity. Velm civilians rushed toward them in waves. Human crew members stood at the loading ramps, pulling people aboard as fast as they could move. There was no time for organization. No time for paperwork. Get on the ship or die. Those were the only choices. The Kresh attacked the evacuation zones. They came in waves of black, writhing mass. The biomechanical creatures moved like liquid and struck like hammers. Human Marines met them with fire. Literal fire. Flamethrowers turned the advancing Kresh into burning sludge. When fire did not work, they used chemical weapons. When chemicals failed, they called in orbital strikes. The Kresh learned from every attack. They adapted in real time. Flames that worked on the first wave did nothing to the second. Chemicals that dissolved their biomass in one area were useless in another. The creatures evolved faster than any natural organism should be able to. So humanity adapted faster. When flamethrowers stopped working, Marines switched to kinetic weapons. When kinetic weapons failed, they used acid. When acid did not work, they collapsed buildings on top of the swarm. Whatever worked, they used. There was no doctrine, no established tactics, just humans doing whatever it took to buy time for the evacuation. The battle lasted 72 hours without pause. Marines fought until their ammunition ran out, then fought with whatever they could find. One squad used mining equipment from a nearby industrial complex. Another group trapped a Kresh mass in a water treatment plant and drowned it in chemicals. A Marine named Jackson held a loading ramp open for 20 minutes while Velm civilians fled, even as Kresh tendrils reached for him. He died buying time for 16 families to escape. In space, a destroyer named Churchill detected a Kresh bioship attempting to cut off the evacuation transports. The bioship was massive, the size of a small moon. It had consumed an entire Velm orbital station and was using its mass to grow larger. The Churchill's captain, Commander Rodriguez, made a decision. She ordered her crew to evacuate to nearby ships. Then she programmed the Churchill's navigation system for a collision course. The destroyer accelerated to maximum speed and rammed the bioship. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. Both ships were destroyed instantly. 7 Velm transport vessels carrying 8,000 civilians escaped because of that sacrifice. Dr. Sarah Chen worked in one of the field hospitals. She had never treated combat wounds before. She learned quickly. Velm physiology was different from human, but trauma was trauma. She saved 37 lives in the first day. On the second day, she saved 14 more. On the third day, she worked until she collapsed from exhaustion. 4.7 million Velm had lived on Velm Prime. The evacuation saved 4.1 million. 600,000 died before they could reach the ships. Most died in their homes, consumed by the Kresh before they knew what was happening. Others died in the evacuation zones, killed by Kresh attacks that broke through human defensive lines. When the last transport lifted off, Admiral Okonkwo faced the hardest decision of her life. Velm Prime was lost. The Kresh had spread across 3 continents. They would consume the entire planet within days. If even a single Kresh organism survived, it could spread to other worlds. The swarm would continue. She opened a channel to the Velm government ships. Ambassador Sekthan answered. He knew what she was going to say. He could see it in her face. "You want to destroy our world," Sekthan said. His voice was steady, but his 3 eyes were dim with grief. Admiral Okonkwo nodded. "I am sorry. If we leave even one Kresh alive, they will spread. Other species will die. Your people survived, Ambassador. Your world cannot." Sekthan was quiet for a long moment. Then he gave his permission to what must be done. The human fleet moved to bombardment positions. Every ship with heavy weapons locked onto the planet below. Fusion missiles launched by the hundreds. Plasma cannons fired until their barrels glowed red. Kinetic strikes rained down from orbit. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Velm Prime was a ball of molten rock. The atmosphere had burned away. The oceans had boiled into space. Every trace of the Kresh was gone. So was everything else. The cities. The forests. The mountains. 3 billion years of evolution. 10,000 years of Velm civilization. All of it reduced to lifeless stone. The Velm survivors watched from the transport ships. Many wept. Some were too shocked to react at all. They had lost their home. They had lost their history. They had lost everything except their lives. Admiral Okonkwo stood on her bridge and watched the planet die. She did not look away. This was her order. This was her responsibility. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. Around her, the human fleet began the long journey home. They carried 4.1 million Velm survivors. They left behind 12,000 dead Marines, 847 civilian volunteers who would never see Earth again, 19 ships destroyed or too damaged to save. The galaxy still did not know what had happened. The humans had maintained communication silence throughout the entire operation. No broadcasts. No transmissions. Earth's government had said nothing. The silence would end soon. But for now, humanity focused on the living. The Velm needed food and shelter. They needed medical care. They needed a new home. Earth had prepared for that too. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. The chamber was full. Every species had sent representatives. They had all seen the news reports. Independent journalists had captured footage of the battle at Velm Prime. The images spread across the galaxy in hours. Humanity had acted without permission. They had deployed a military force larger than most species had ever assembled. They had fought a war. They had destroyed an entire planet. All of this had been done in complete silence without informing the assembly. The Kavarn representative spoke first. His voice boomed through the translation system. This is an outrage. The humans violated every protocol. They deployed military forces without authorization. They made war without consulting this body. They destroyed a world without permission. This cannot stand. Other species joined in. The Tholians, those ancient crystal beings, spoke about the dangers of allowing young species to act independently. The humans had set a terrible precedent. If every species acted without assembly approval, chaos would follow. Order required cooperation and patience. Ambassador Chen returned to Zenith Prime for the hearing. He had been recalled specifically for this moment. He walked into the chamber knowing he was about to face the judgment of 847 species. Many of them wanted Earth punished. Some called for economic sanctions. Others suggested expelling humanity from the assembly entirely. Chen did not prepare a speech. He brought something simpler. When the presiding Zintar called him to speak, Chen walked to the platform. He connected his portable display to the chamber's holographic system. Images appeared above the assembly floor. They were not images of battle or destruction. They were images of rescue, a human marine carrying a Velm child through fire, a doctor treating wounded civilians in a field hospital, a transport ship lifting off with hundreds of refugees packed inside, human soldiers forming a defensive line while families fled behind them, the destroyer Churchill ramming the Kresh bioship, Velm civilians embracing their human rescuers. Chen let the images speak for several minutes. The assembly chamber grew quiet. Some species watched with interest. Others looked uncomfortable. Then Chen showed different images. These were from 8 months ago. The assembly debate about the Velm crisis, species after species voting against immediate action, the decision to form a committee. The timeline showing 8 months of study while the Velm had only 6 months to live. Chen stopped the display. He looked at the assembled representatives. His voice was calm and steady. 8 months ago, we asked for your help. We told you the Velm were dying. We offered Earth's military to save them. You debated. You formed committees. You scheduled studies. You talked while they died. He paused. The chamber remained silent. We heard your words. We saw your inaction. We chose a different path. The Kavarn representative erupted from his seat. You violated protocol. You acted without approval. You started a war without consulting this body. You broke every rule we have established. Chen turned to face the Kavarn directly. We ended a genocide while you scheduled another meeting. The assembly exploded into argument. Species shouted at each other across the chamber. The Zintar presiding officer flashed colors frantically, trying to restore order. It took 15 minutes for the chaos to settle. When order returned, something unexpected happened. The representative of a species called the Yith stood to speak. The Yith were a young species, only 300 years into spaceflight. They rarely spoke in assembly sessions. Their voice was quiet but clear. 40 years ago, my people faced a similar crisis. A plague threatened to destroy our largest colony. We asked the assembly for help. You formed a committee. By the time the committee reported its findings, 3 million of my people had died. We learned that day that speeches do not cure disease. We support Earth's actions. Another species stood. Then another. 47 species in total rose to support Earth. They were all younger species, most less than 1,000 years old. They had all experienced the Assembly's slow response to crises. They had all watched their people suffer while debates continued. The old species argued back. The Tholians spoke about the importance of patience and wisdom. The Kavarn insisted on the necessity of order and rules. Others claimed that allowing military action without approval would lead to chaos. Ambassador Sekthan had not planned to speak. He sat in the Velm section, watching the debate rage around him. But as he listened to species argue about protocols and procedures, something inside him broke. He stood slowly and walked to the speaker's platform. The chamber quieted when they saw him. Everyone knew the Velm had suffered most. Everyone knew what they had lost. Sekthan's voice was soft, but his words carried weight. My people asked you for help. You offered us sympathy and studies. The humans offered us ships and soldiers. They asked for nothing in return. Not territory, not resources, not even gratitude. They simply acted. He looked around the chamber at all the species who had voted against helping his people. 12,000 humans died saving my people. They gave their lives for a species they had never met. While you debated protocols, they were loading our children onto transport ships. While you discussed procedures, they were fighting monsters in our streets. While you formed committees, they were dying for us. Sekthan's three eyes focused on the Kavarn representative. You ask why the humans did not wait for permission. I ask why they needed permission to prevent genocide. You want to punish them for breaking your rules. I want to thank them for saving 4 million lives. He returned to his seat. The chamber was silent. The Tholian representative rose. They moved slowly, their crystal body refracting light into rainbows. When they spoke, their voice carried the weight of 50,000 years of existence. We must confess something. 10,000 years ago we faced the Kresh. They attacked 3 species under our protection. We debated our response for 2 years. We considered the philosophical implications. We calculated the costs. By the time we decided to act, all 3 species were extinct. We have carried that shame for 10 millennia. The revelation shocked the Assembly. The Tholians had never spoken of this before. We thought we were being wise. We believed patience and careful consideration were virtues. We were wrong. Wisdom without action is just watching others die. The humans understood what we learned too late. The vote came that evening. The Assembly split almost exactly in half. The older species wanted Earth sanctioned. The younger species supported humanity's actions. In the end, no resolution passed. The Assembly was deadlocked. Chen stood before them one final time. He delivered Earth's response to the crisis. Earth will no longer participate in this assembly. We came here believing in cooperation and shared purpose. We learned that this body values procedure over people and debate over deeds. We will find another way. He left the chamber. Behind him, the assembly erupted into chaos once more. But Chen did not look back. He had said everything that needed saying. That night, representatives from 47 species came to the human embassy. They asked a simple question. What comes next? Chen smiled. We are forming something new. Something better. Join us. 1 year later, the galaxy had changed. The Galactic Assembly still met on Zenith Prime. The old species still debated. The Kavarn still argued for order and procedure. The Tholians still spoke of patience and wisdom. Committees formed. Studies were commissioned. Reports were written. Nothing had changed for them, but 47 species no longer attended those meetings. They had formed something new. They called it the Accord of Action. The name was simple and direct, chosen deliberately. No grand titles, no complicated structure, just a commitment to act when others needed help. The Accord's charter fit on a single page. When crisis strikes, we respond immediately. When others deliberate, we act. When others philosophize, we save lives. Every member species contributed ships and resources. Every member had equal voice. But there was no debate about whether to help, only how Ambassador Chen became the first Secretary General of the Accord. He did not want the position. He had hoped to retire, to return to Earth and forget the politics of the galaxy. But the 47 species asked him to lead, and he could not refuse. He had started this. He would see it through. Admiral Okonkwo took charge of the Accord's military forces. She trained soldiers from every member species in human rapid deployment tactics. She taught them to think like humans, adaptable, pragmatic, relentless. The Accord fleet practiced joint operations constantly. When an emergency call came, They needed to deploy within hours, not months. The Velm survivors had settled on a world in human space. Earth had been terraforming it for 50 years, preparing it for future colonies. Instead, they gave it to the Velm. The world had no name yet, so the Velm called it New Hope. It was not Velm Prime. It never would be. But it was home. The Velm built a monument in the capital city. It showed a human marine in full armor, carrying a Velm child in one arm. The marine's other hand held a weapon pointed outward, protecting the child. At the base of the statue, words were carved in both Velm and English. When words failed, humanity answered. Ambassador Sekthan stood before the monument every morning. He would spend a few minutes in silence, remembering the 12,000 humans who died for his people. Then he would go to work. The Velm had joined the Accord, and Sekthan served as their representative. He would ensure his people honored their debt by helping others as they had been helped. The Accord's first test came 6 months after its formation. The Kresh appeared in the territory of a species called the Mothran. The swarm had adapted from its defeat at Velm Prime. It moved faster now. It spread more aggressively. The Mothran were a peaceful species of only 2 billion people. They could not fight the Kresh alone. The Galactic Assembly scheduled an emergency session to discuss the crisis. They formed a committee. They began preliminary studies. They would need 4 months to prepare recommendations. The Accord deployed in 3 days. This time, it was not just humans who fought. Velm ships joined the fleet, crewed by survivors who refused to let others suffer as they had. The Yith sent their medical corps. The Qatar provided transport vessels. 20 different species worked together with a single purpose: save the Mothran. Admiral Okonkwo commanded from the bridge of the Indomitable. Around her, crew members from 6 different species worked their stations. The communications officer was Velm. The weapons officer was human. The navigation specialist was Qatar. They had trained together for months. They moved as one coordinated unit. The battle lasted 5 days. The Kresh had evolved, but so had the Accord's tactics. They used the lessons learned from Velm Prime. They adapted even faster than the swarm. When conventional weapons failed, they found new approaches. When the Kresh spread across the ground, the Accord burned the atmosphere. When the swarm tried to escape to space, they faced a blockade of ships ready to obliterate anything that moved. The Mothran lost only 300,000 people. Compared to the billions who died on the Velm worlds, it was a miracle. The evacuation had been faster. The response had been stronger. The Accord had learned from its first mission and improved. When the battle ended, the Mothran government asked to join the Accord. They were accepted immediately. The organization grew to 48 member species. Other species noticed. The Accord's success could not be ignored. While the Assembly debated and studied, the Accord saved lives. While committees formed, the Accord's fleets deployed. The contrast was impossible to miss. Young species began leaving the Assembly to join the Accord. Within the year, membership grew to 93 species. They all shared a common philosophy. Action mattered more than words. Results mattered more than procedure. Saving lives mattered more than protecting bureaucracy. The old Assembly did not disappear. It still existed. It still served a purpose. For trade negotiations and diplomatic discussions, the Assembly remained valuable. But for emergencies, for crises, for moments when lives hung in the balance, the galaxy increasingly turned to the Accord. Even some older species began to change. The Tholians sent observers to Accord operations. They watched how the organization functioned. They saw decisions made in hours that would have taken the Assembly months. After 6 months of observation, the Tholians formally requested to join. Their application was approved unanimously. The Kavarn remained opposed. They argued the Accord represented chaos and disorder. They insisted that proper procedure was essential to civilization. But their protests grew quieter as more species left the Assembly for the Accord. Ambassador Chen stood before the Accord Council 1 year after its formation. Representatives from 93 species filled the chamber. It was smaller than the Assembly Hall, more cramped, less impressive. But every representative in the room shared the same commitment. Chen received a report of a new crisis. A species called the Ventok faced an environmental disaster. Volcanic activity threatened to destroy their three largest cities. They needed evacuation ships and geological engineers. The report estimated they had 10 days before the eruptions began. Chen looked around the chamber at all the species who had chosen action over debate. He asked a simple question. Discussion? A chorus of voices responded. No, we act. The Accord fleet deployed 6 hours later. They reached the Ventok system in 3 days. The evacuation was complete before the volcanoes erupted. Not a single Ventok died. The operation was so smooth, so efficient, that other species barely noticed it had happened. It was simply what the Accord did. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had fought in the field hospitals on Velm Prime, now directed the Accord's medical services. She trained doctors from 40 different species. She wrote treatment protocols for emergencies. She made sure that when crisis struck, the Accord's medical teams would be ready. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched another successful mission complete. Her crew was a mixture of 20 species now. They worked together seamlessly. She had worried in the early days whether such cooperation was possible. Now she knew it was not only possible but natural. When everyone shared the same goal, differences in culture or biology did not matter. Ambassador Sekthan visited the monument on New Hope every morning. He still remembered every detail of the day humanity came to save his people. He remembered the silence, the lack of grand speeches or formal declarations, just ships appearing in the sky and soldiers hitting the ground. That silence had taught the galaxy more than 1,000 speeches ever could. It taught them that actions mattered, that deeds spoke louder than declarations, that when people were dying, the time for talking was over. Humanity had not tried to change the galaxy through diplomacy or persuasion. They had changed it by example. They showed what was possible when species chose action over endless debate. They proved that cooperation could happen quickly, that decisions did not require months of committee meetings, that saving lives was more important than following procedure. The philosophy spread. Not through propaganda or pressure, simply through demonstration. Species saw the Accord succeed where the Assembly failed. They saw lives saved, they saw problems solved, and they wanted to be part of that. When Earth chose silence, when words failed, humanity answered with deeds. They showed the galaxy a different way, not perfect, not without cost, but undeniably effective, and the galaxy listened.